My name is Tori and I'm 32 years old. Life hasn't exactly turned out the way I imagined it would. It's been 4 years since I married Kelvin, and I've spent nearly all of that time living in his parents' house. It wasn't that I had planned, but it's what was expected. Kelvin's parents, Fran and Charles, own a small diner that's been in the family for decades. Kelvin has a steady office job outside the house, but I was expected to leave my career behind and help run the diner full-time. When I say help, though, I really mean I'm the one doing almost everything. I'm the one waking up before dawn to pick up fresh ingredients, prepping the food, and serving the customers with a smile, even when I'm running on fumes. Most nights I don't finish until long after the dinner rush, and the exhaustion is starting to take a serious toll on me, mentally and physically. Fran and Charles never offer me a day off, not even once. In fact, our regulars have started to notice how overworked I am. They worry about me more than my own in-laws do. One day, my younger brother Dan called with exciting news. He was getting married to his longtime girlfriend, Pamela. They're still young, but they've always been responsible and mature. My parents, Janice and Rob, adore Pamela and have already welcomed her as part of the family. Hearing the big news felt like a bright spot in my otherwise gray life. Dan told me the invitations weren't ready yet, but he made it clear he wanted me there. Of course, I said yes without hesitation. But there was one problem. That problem was Fran and Charles, and whether they'd actually let me go. Technically, I'm considered an employee of the diner, which means I should have vacation days. I decided to ask for just 3 days off to attend the wedding. Hey, can I talk to you guys for a second? It was late, and we had just closed the diner. Fran and Charles were relaxing in the living room chatting about nothing important while Kelvin scrolled on his phone. What is it now? All three of them looked at me like I was a nuisance. The tension in the room was suffocating. Well, my brother Dan is getting married in 2 months, and I was wondering if I could take 3 days off to go. Do you really think you're in a position to take time off? Fran glared at me with a look so sharp it could have cut glass. I felt my stomach twist with nerves, but I nodded anyway. I should be entitled to vacation days, right? And I've never used any of them, so I thought, oh, I see. So you just want to take time off while still collecting a paycheck? But if I don't use them, you'll just make me work through my usual days off to make up for it. And just let her take the time off. It's not a big deal. The already tense atmosphere somehow grew worse, but Kelvin's casual tone seemed to calm Fran just a little. I couldn't believe it. Kelvin was actually siding with me. I looked at him stunned. He smirked and glanced at Fran as if they shared some private joke. Fran, catching whatever unspoken message Kelvin was sending, suddenly smiled and agreed without further argument. I wasn't sure what just happened, but I didn't care. I was so thrilled to get the time off that I wanted to jump for joy. The day before the wedding, I packed a bag for my 3-day stay at my parents' house and left early in the morning. Fran, Charles, and Kelvin were still asleep, so I left a quick note on the kitchen counter. Heading to my brother's wedding. Be back in 3 days. Tori. I got into my old sedan and started the hour-long drive to my parents' place. It wasn't far, but it felt like crossing into a whole different world. A world where I didn't have to tiptoe around Fran or feel invisible to Kelvin. I hadn't been back home in almost 4 years, and the thought of seeing my family again filled me with excitement and relief. I'm here, I called out as I stepped through the front door. Since I left so early, I arrived ahead of schedule. I knew my parents, Janice and Rob, would already be up, but I still tried to sneak in quietly just in case. The smell of coffee and fresh-baked biscuits drifted through the air, instantly making the house feel warm and inviting. Oh, you're here early. The moment she saw me, she rushed over, her face lighting up with joy. Yeah, I left earlier than I planned. I left my small suitcase by the door, kicked off my shoes, and stepped into the house. Mom grabbed my hand and practically dragged me into the living room. Looking at her face, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. It truly hit me that I was home. In the living room, Dad was sipping his coffee at the dining table, and Dan was already sitting there too, scrolling through his phone. The moment they saw me, their faces lit up with the same warm smiles I missed so much. It had been 4 long years since we'd been together like this. I could barely contain my own excitement. We spent the next couple of hours sitting around the table talking and laughing like no time had passed at all. Dan told me all about Pamela, how she'd been obsessing over every detail of the wedding and how excited she was to officially join the family. He looked so smitten when he talked about her. It warmed my heart. They saw me how things were at Fran and Charles's place, but I avoided the topic. I didn't want to spoil such a happy occasion with stories about how miserable I'd been. The next day was the wedding. Pamela looked stunning in her gown, and the ceremony was so heartfelt that I actually felt tears sting my eyes. After a long, wonderful day filled with love and laughter, we headed back to the house. Even though it had been a joyful day, we were all exhausted and went to bed almost immediately. The next morning, I was supposed to head back to Fran and Charles's place, but the thought of leaving my family so soon made my heart ache. I found myself wishing I could stay just one more day. I knew Fran and Kelvin would never approve, though. But when my parents encouraged me, saying, "It's a special occasion, what's one more day?" I decided to take a chance and call Fran. Honestly, I was terrified. It wasn't just that I expected Fran to say no. I didn't know what kind of verbal lashing I'd get for even asking. I stepped outside onto the porch, phone in hand, staring at the screen for a few long moments before forcing myself to dial her number. After a few rings, Fran's sharp, familiar voice came through the line. "Hello?" "Well, how long are you planning to stay over there? You need to come back here now." She didn't even try to hide her irritation. I was just calling to see if it would be okay if I stayed one more day." I swallowed the knot in my throat and asked, even though I already knew the answer. Fran let out a loud, dramatic sigh, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence on the other end of the line. That silence stretched on for what felt like forever. I started thinking I should just pack up and head back when I heard her scoff through the phone. "You really only think about yourself, don't you? You know what? Just stay there as long as you want. There's no need to come back here ever." "What?" I was stunned into silence. "Oh, and you should just divorce Kelvin while you're at it. We don't need a useless daughter-in-law, and honestly, Kelvin doesn't want you around anymore either." Was she serious? Did she actually mean that? Still holding the phone, I stared at it for a moment before deciding to call Kelvin. "Hey, Kelvin." "What do you want?" His voice was calm, almost indifferent, like nothing was out of the ordinary. "Sorry to bother you while you're working, but I just talked to your mom. Would it be okay if I stayed at my parents' for one more day?" "What did Mom say?" "She said I shouldn't bother coming back, and that we should just get divorced. She even said your dad doesn't want me around." I told him everything Fran has said, though I didn't actually believe Kelvin felt the same way. I assumed Fran's words were just a fit of anger, exaggerated to make a point. But Kelvin went quiet for a moment and then let out a long sigh. "Look, Tori, I didn't want to bring this up right now, but I've been thinking about divorce for a while now." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. It felt like the world has stopped spinning. 4 years of marriage. Sure, there were moments when I wondered if the love between us had faded, but the only reason I endured Fran and Charles was because I wanted to protect my marriage. Why? I tried to steady my voice, desperate to understand why. The truth is, there's someone else. And just like that, it was over. Hearing the words "there's someone else" from Kelvin made one thing painfully clear. There was no saving this marriage. So yeah, that's how it is. He didn't even wait for my response. He just hung up, leaving me alone with the weight of his confession. I stood there frozen on the porch, unable to cry, unable to move. "Tori, what's wrong?" I hadn't even noticed how much time had passed until Mom appeared, her face full of concern. When I turned toward her, I saw Dad standing just behind her, looking equally worried. "It's nothing." It wasn't final yet, and this was supposed to be a happy time for the family. The last thing I wanted was to dampen the mood by talking about divorce, but Mom saw right through me. Her eyes narrowed slightly as if she were trying to piece something together. Still, she couldn't press me. She simply nodded and guided me back inside. I threw myself into the lively energy of the house, focusing on the chatter and laughter as Dan and Pamela joined us later in the day. If I'm being honest, it felt more like I was forcing myself to appear happy. We all went out to brunch at a cozy diner in town, laughing and catching up like old times. I clung to their company as if being alone might shatter the fragile composure I was desperately holding on to. But I could tell Dan and Pamela sensed something wasn't right. "You're heading back tomorrow, right?" Dan asked casually, though his eyes studied me a little too carefully. Yeah, I guess. Truthfully, I didn't know if I could or even should go back. "Are you okay, Tori? You seem a little off today." "Yeah, you're definitely not yourself." I noticed the way they've been glancing at me all day, their worry barely concealed. It's nothing really." I could feel their eyes on me, unrelenting, as if they were trying to unravel the truth I was hiding. It was unsettling, like they could see right through me. "What? Why are you two staring at me like that?" Before they could respond, Mom and Dad returned to the table, balancing cups of coffee and plates of pancakes. They chuckled at the odd little scene they'd walked in on. Taking the cue, Dan and Pamela let it go, turning their attention back to the conversation with Mom and Dad. But the cheerful atmosphere didn't last long. My phone buzzed loudly in my bag, cutting through the laughter. I pulled it out and saw Fran's name flashing on the screen. The table fell silent, and all eyes turned to me as I hesitated to answer. "It's Fran. I'll just step outside and take this." "Why go outside? Just answer it here." She reached out and grabbed my wrist, her grip surprisingly strong, keeping me from leaving as if to say that there was no room for argument. "Okay." "Hello." As soon as I answered, Fran's laugh rang out on the other end, a sharp mocking sound that made my stomach churn. Well, well, Tori. So I hear Kelvin told you he wants a divorce? Oh, how amusing. Look, can we talk about this tomorrow when I'm back? Fran's voice was so loud and cutting that there was no way my family hadn't heard her. You had no idea, did you? Kelvin's been cheating on you for months and you've just been playing the clueless little wife. You were never good enough for this family. Never. Honestly, it's such a relief to finally be rid of you. Kelvin will be sending over the divorce papers soon, so don't bother coming back here. We'll pack up your things and ship them to you. Consider it our last favor. With that, she hung up, leaving me clutching the phone in stunned silence. Kelvin was cheating. I stood there frozen, still holding the phone as Fran's words echoed in my head. When Kelvin said there was someone else, I'd braced myself for the worst, but hearing it had been an affair all along, it hit differently. Harder. What had I been working so hard for? All those years of sacrifice, humiliation, and exhaustion. For this? The thought cracked something inside me and tears began streaming down my face before I could stop them. Tori. There was no doubt now. Mom, Dad, Dan, and Pamela had heard everything. Fran's voice had been loud enough to carry across the table. Even though I'd kept the volume low, Fran's words had filled the room. I couldn't bring myself to offer an excuse or force a smile. All I could do was stare at the ground, wishing I could disappear. So, that's what's going on. His words hung heavy in the room, cutting through the silence. Mom gently pressed a handkerchief into my hands as I tried, and failed, to wipe away the tears that wouldn't stop falling. The faint scent of Mom's perfume on the fabric only made me cry harder. It was a reminder of all the discomfort I'd been missing for years. Did I hear something about cheating? The air in the room grew cold, heavy with tension. I didn't have to look up to know everyone's faces were tight with anger and shock. My brother and his wife had just celebrated their wedding, and now they were hearing about my impending divorce. They had to be horrified, but then I felt a warm, steady hand rest on my head. I slowly looked up and saw Mom staring at me with tears brimming in her own eyes. Don't cry, sweetheart. You've done more than enough. 4 years without coming home. Stuck in that awful place. And then Mom told me everything she had been keeping to herself. She had been worried about me ever since I stopped coming home after my marriage. She had called Fran and Charles, even sent friends to the diner to check on me. She had learned that I looked utterly drained and exhausted. Customers at the diner had whispered to each other about how Fran and Charles treated me like their personal servant. When Mom called Fran to ask about me, Fran had brushed her off with comments like, "She's not here," or worse, "Your daughter is useless." Mom had wanted to intervene right then, but Dad convinced her to wait. "We'll bring her home when she asks for help," he has said, knowing I wouldn't leave until I reached my breaking point. I had no idea they'd known all along. Shame washed over me and I couldn't bear to meet their eyes. What kind of treatment is that? That's disgusting. She rarely raised her voice, but Pamela's quiet fury was palpable. "I thought you looked worn out, but now it all makes sense. Tori, you're not going back there. You're going to divorce him and make them pay for what they've done." "She's right, Tori. You're done with them. They're not worth your tears." "But just taking alimony and walking away isn't enough. They need to understand how much they've put you through. They need to pay, not just in money, but in consequences." As she spoke, Pamela's eyes gleamed with a dangerous determination. I wouldn't have to do anything, she insisted. I apologized anyway, feeling guilty for dragging them into my mess, but Dan cut me off. "You have nothing to apologize for," he said, his voice rising with anger. "What they've done to you makes my blood boil." With that, Dan and Pamela exchanged a knowing look. "We've got some work to do," they said, before heading out the door. I stood there stunned by their whirlwind departure, unsure of what they had planned, but too drained to ask. Mom and Dad gave me reassuring smiles. "Stay here as long as you need. You're home now." A few days later, an envelope arrived from Kelvin. Inside was the divorce paperwork. His signature was already there, bold and final. I felt a pang of sadness as I signed my name, but the next morning I took the papers to the courthouse and filed them. And just like that, I was officially a divorcee. A title I never thought I'd hold. But the following month, something unexpected happened. I had been looking for work near my parents' house, but nothing had panned out yet. I was starting to feel stuck when my phone rang. The name on the screen stopped me cold. Kelvin, my ex-husband. Curiosity got the better of me and I answered. The furious tone of Kelvin's voice hit me immediately. "What the hell did you do, Tori?" I froze, confused, as Kelvin's voice grew louder and angrier. "Ever since you left, no one's coming to the diner anymore. Our suppliers are canceling contracts. My mom and dad are panicking. It's all your fault." "I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't do anything." "Don't lie to me. Who else could have done this?" No matter how much I insisted I had nothing to do with it, Kelvin refused to listen. He declared that he and his parents were coming to my parents' house immediately to straighten things out. I pleaded with him not to come, but my protest fell on deaf ears. "You better be ready for us." Panicked, I ran to my mom, explaining everything. She stayed remarkably calm and picked up the phone to make a call of her own. Her calm demeanor only made me more anxious as I paced the room, trying to figure out what to do. At the time, it was just me and Mom at home. The thought of Fran or Kelvin hurting Mom sent a wave of dread through me. I had to protect her. I darted in the kitchen, grabbing for anything I could use as a weapon, but Mom gently stopped me. "It's okay, Tori, trust me." She calmly suggested we wait for them to arrive and began preparing tea, as if we were about to host polite guests. A couple of hours later, a car screeched to a stop in front of the house. Kelvin, Fran, and Charles stormed up the driveway. All three of them looked livid, their eyes burning with rage as they stepped inside. "What the hell, Tori?" Kelvin lunged toward me, but Charles held him back with a firm hand. "Our apologies for showing up unannounced." He gave Mom a quick, awkward nod. "Please, have a seat." I couldn't understand why she was letting them in, but I trusted her judgment and stayed silent. Mom poured tea for everyone, unshaken by the hostile glares Kelvin and Fran were throwing my way. "Please, if you could just wait a little while longer," she said with a calm smile. The room fell into a heavy silence. It couldn't have been more than a few minutes, but it felt like hours. As I fidgeted nervously, wondering what Mom had planned, the doorbell rang. Before Mom could even get to the door, it swung open, and someone stepped inside. The doors slammed against the wall, and there they were, Dan and Pamela, their expressions sharp and unrelenting. Kelvin, Fran, and Charles looked completely blindsided, confusion flickering across their faces. "Sorry to keep you waiting." He was dressed sharply in a suit, his movements deliberate as he exhaled and sat beside me. "Shall we get started?" Kelvin, Fran, and Charles stared at Dan and Pamela, their confusion evident. They had no idea what was about to hit them. "What the hell is this? Why is he here?" "My mom told me you'd be coming, so I made sure I was ready. Honestly, I've been waiting for this moment for a long time." Dan reached into his briefcase, pulling out a thick envelope. He spread its contents across the table, papers, photos, and documents. Several photos caught my eye, but I couldn't make out the details just yet. "Kelvin, you've been cheating on Tori, haven't you?" Kelvin froze, his eyes widening in shock. But Dan didn't give him a chance to respond. He pressed on, methodical and unrelenting. "We've gathered all the evidence. Every detail of your affair is right here. The proof is solid. Texts, receipts, photos, even witness statements. We even have a signed statement from your mistress confirming the affair. That means we'll be pursuing damages for infidelity." The room was stunned silent. Kelvin, Fran, and Charles looked as though the wind had been knocked out of them. "What are you talking about? We're already divorced." "Didn't you know? Even after a divorce, if there's evidence of infidelity during the marriage, the wronged party can still file for damages." Dan smiled politely as he spoke, while Kelvin's face drained of color. He had no comeback. "We didn't come all this way to talk about that. We're here because this woman has been sabotaging our business. She's responsible for ruining everything." Fran's face turned red with fury as she stood, pointing an accusing finger at me. "Let me address that." She flashed a confident smile like she'd been waiting for this moment. "By the way, I should introduce myself properly. I'm Pamela Watson, formerly Pamela Warner. My father happens to be the owner of Warner Dining Group, one of the largest food service companies in the region." Charles reacted immediately, his face going pale as recognition dawned. What did you just say?" He turned to me, his expression frantic. "Why didn't you tell us?" Was there really any reason to do so? As soon as I spoke, Charles slumped into his chair, looking like the life had been drained from him. "What does that have to do with you?" "Oh, Fran, I would have thought a business owner would understand by now." Pamela shot Fran a look of pity that only seemed to enrage her further. "If you treated Tori with the respect she deserved, none of this would have happened." Pamela let out a soft laugh, her expression one of pure satisfaction. Watching her in action, I realized just how dangerous it was to cross someone like Pamela, and I was grateful she was on my side. Pamela had done her homework. After I stopped working at the diner, the regulars had begun to leave, saying, "If Tori's not there, what's the point?" Even the suppliers had walked away, admitting, "We only worked with Fran and Charles because Tori kept things running smoothly. Without her, it's not worth it." I had a little investigation done. Turns out Tori was the one holding your diner together. Customers loved her. She was a part of your business. Your suppliers? They stayed loyal because of her, not you. But now that she's gone, they've all said the same thing. Working with you isn't worth it. Pamela's father, of course, heard about what happened. At Pamela's urging, he decided he would no longer support their business. In short, Fran and Charles's diner was abandoned by their customers, their suppliers, and everyone else in the industry. Fran and Charles sat there, their faces pale as the truth sunk in. They couldn't argue. They knew it was all true. "That can't be true!" "Would you like to see the evidence?" Fran picked up the papers with shaking hands, her eyes darting across the damning words. Halfway through, she threw them down in frustration, her face twisted in anger. "You had no right to destroy our business. You destroyed it yourselves. If you treated Tori like a human being instead of free labor, you still have your diner and your dignity." Charles looked down, defeated, unable to meet anyone's gaze. This is all Tori's fault! Even now, Kelvin refused to take responsibility, desperately trying to pin the blame on me. He lunged toward me in a fit of rage, but Dan stepped in and blocked him before he could get any closer. What the hell is wrong with you? You're still trying to pull this crap? Kelvin looked completely unhinged, but Dan remained calm, his expression hard as stone. You cheated. You mistreated my sister, and you let her suffer for years. I'll never forgive you for that. Kelvin let out a bitter and mocking laugh, as if he still had the upper hand. And what can you do about it? Did you forget? For a time, I was your brother-in-law. He produced a sleek business card from his breast pocket and held it up for Kelvin to see. The card bore Dan's name and title, attorney at law. Dan worked for one of the top law firms in the state, specializing in criminal cases, but occasionally representing clients dealing with infidelity and domestic disputes. Kelvin stared at the card, his defiance draining away. He sank back into his chair, realizing the battle was lost. Oh, and by the way, we've been in touch with your mistress. She wanted us to let you know she's done with you. Apparently, she doesn't want anything to do with a man who's lost everything. Kelvin's face went ghostly pale, his hands trembling as he tried to process the blow. This conversation is over. We'll be proceeding with legal action regarding the damages and alimony. Kelvin turned pale, while Fran, visibly shaking, turned to Pamela with desperation in her eyes. Wait, please. Isn't there some way to work this out? It's far too late for that. If you valued Tori from the start, none of this would have happened. Your actions have left your entire family outcast. This is all on you. Fran's face turned ghostly pale as she hung her head, unable to respond. Charles, clinging to his last shred of pride, stumbled to his feet and spoke. So what if we've been blacklisted in the restaurant industry? We'll rebuild, somehow. Pamela's lips curled into a cold, knowing smile. Be my guest, but just know this, my father will never help you again. And your customers and suppliers have already written you off, so good luck. A heavy silence fell over the room. Fran, Charles, and Kelvin sat frozen, defeated, with nothing left to say. I believe we're done here. Now please leave. She stood and ushered the defeated trio out of the house, her authority leaving no room for argument. As she closed the door, she turned to me and said, You did well. Kelvin paused on the porch as if to say something, but one sharp glare from Dan silenced him. He lowered his head and left without another word. I successfully received alimony and damages from Kelvin and his mistress. Though it was technically my money, I couldn't have fought this battle alone, so I gave a portion of it to Dan, Pamela, and my parents as a gesture of gratitude. At first, they refused, saying they didn't need anything in return, but when I told them this is all I can give right now, please let me do this, they finally accepted with reluctant smiles. A few weeks later, I landed a new job managing a local cafe. It was a perfect fit for me, and I was finally starting to feel like myself again. Living with my parents, I felt surrounded by love and warmth, a stark contrast to the cold, oppressive years I'd spent with Kelvin and his family. None of this would have been possible without my family. My gratitude for them was immeasurable. A few months later, Dan, Pamela, and Mom surprised me with something unexpected. They told me they were opening a new cafe downtown and asked if I'd help manage it. You've got the skills, Tori. If anyone can make this place thrive, it's you. We'd love to work with you, but more importantly, we just want to see you happy. Their kindness brought tears to my eyes. After everything, it felt incredible to be appreciated and valued. Thank you. Thank you so much. And so, I began a new chapter of my life. Working alongside Dan and Pamela while spending quality time with Mom made me feel like my life was finally bright again. One day I heard a rumor that made me pause. Fran, Charles, and Kelvin had apparently tried to open another diner in a neighboring town, but it had failed miserably. Their reputation was so tarnished that no one trusted them anymore, neither customers nor suppliers. At first I felt a flash of anger, but it quickly gave way to pity. It was the ultimate example of reaping what you sow. I no longer felt any anger or hatred toward them. Instead, I decided to let go of their memory altogether. I chose to live in the present, free from the chains of my past. I had my family, the people who loved and valued me. That was more than enough. As I helped install the new cafe's sign with our shiny new logo, a wave of pride surged through me. This was my place, my safe haven. I would never let anyone take that away from me again. And with that, I fully stepped into my new life.